Welcome everyone. I'm Paula Farmer. I'm the facilitator of the Glide Racial Justice Group, and we have many of our group members here today, but today is a special meeting, so we've invited all of Glide's congregational groups here for this special conversation with Dr. Kenneth Kim. But before we get started, Racial Justice Group typically does start our meetings with our agenda and our agreements. So I'm going to pull that up for us. And we also have a quick check-in. So let me just see. Perry, is something going on where I can't share my actual screen?
Tell me what you're seeing.
What I am seeing is, hold on, let me just go down here and close things. Maybe that will help.
Worst comes to worst, you can always post the Google Doc and I'll share it on my screen as well.
Okay. So, Dr. Kim, are you still sharing right now? Okay, here we go. Can you see that now? The slide deck?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so here is our agenda for today. We're going to be starting out with a check-in. So in the chat for our check-in this time, and our chat is always so fun, we're going to do what's called a waterfall, where everybody just puts in their ideas in the chat. So if you have not used the chat, it should be, if you click on the three buttons next to your name, you should be able to get to the chat that way. And there are also other ways you can do that. So the question of today is, in honor of Black History Month, what is one thing that you can share that you have learned that is new to you, that you've learned this month about Black history? It could be an historical event, it could be about a person and their achievements, or it could be a geographical aha. So share your knowledge. And make sure you have it going to everyone. There's some good ones coming in. The connection between Ernie Barnes and James and Florida Evans. Tom, thank you. You always. The amazing Black artists featured in the documentary Black Art, The Absence of Light. I learned about the Arabic writing that was carved into the church pews by slaves as they were building their houses of worship. It was a beautiful script on wood and was a tie to their Muslim past, to the faith building that was keeping them going. Thanks, Tatiana. And I believe that is from the Henry Louis Gates, the Black Church, the history of the Black Church.
Yes.
Are there any that are profound that are sticking out for you as the waterfall continues? You can chime in here. Oh, that one's interesting. Fiona, can you tell us a little bit about the Black Panthers information that you are, Black Panthers started offering acupuncture in the Bronx to addicts detoxing?
Yeah, I started watching this film last night. It's called Dope is Death. And it's, do you all know of the news thing Vice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they put it out. I guess they have films that are recommended. So it was the Black Panthers and then also the young lords who started offering, they realized that I'm sorry, something weird's going on with my screen. I can't see it, any of you now. So they realized that addiction was holding the Black community back, and they realized they had to address it. And then I forget the piece of information that they saw, that acupuncture was working, but so they started offering acupuncture in the Bronx to addicts, and it was really working. It was really helping people. You can completely detox from heroin just using acupuncture, apparently.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
I'll share the link to the film.
Thank you. Winnie says, I got challenged this morning listening to the Bay podcast regarding the Tuskegee experiment and application to today. I've been perhaps overlying, assigning the impact, and like many, assuming questioning equals refusal. It's a good check. And she also includes the link. Winnie, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I was just like, I've been very like, well, no wonder Black folks don't want to take the vaccine. And then I was listening to that today and I was like, okay, Winifred, check on that. So it was really good. It was this idea that, that talking to people and even over the years since, not just in the context of COVID, but that when Black folks are like, I got questions, probably mostly white folks, or at least non-Black folks, go, oh, then that means you're refusing whatever the treatment is, and healthcare, just as a healthcare thing overall. And I was like, wow, I think I'm doing that, so it was just a very good check, and very, I thought it was very good. So
Great. There's so many good ones here. We'll take one last one. If somebody wants to highlight something that we haven't mentioned, go ahead and pop on.
Well, it looks like Tatiana and I both watched One Night in Miami, which is really good.
I haven't seen that yet.
About kind of this relationship between Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, and Muhammad Ali, and some others, Jim Brown as well. It's good.
Interesting things that Priscilla also saying that she was reminded and about Stephen Biko. So those are all great. So if you are able to go back and pop in any links that you can to that information, and we'll make sure that we create our own playlist of things that people can revisit, because we still, while we still only have 5 days of Black History Month, GLIDE is always Black History 365. So we'll keep that conversation going. So that's our check-in. Now we're going to go to our agreements. And then after agreements, we're going to have Dr. Kim come in to talk to us about the State of GLIDE programs. And then we're going to move to questions and answers. And then we're going to wrap up. So it's a little bit different event today. So here are our agreements. If we could, everybody just popcorn out, just claim one and go ahead and read it aloud. I'll start. It's okay to respectfully disagree. It is not okay to blame or shame yourself or others.
Beware of intent and impact.
Practice self-care, take a break when needed, and try to come back to the discussion.
Practice both and thinking.
Maintain confidentiality.
notice your process and your content. Don't manipulate the situation.
Lean into discomfort and take risks. Try on a new idea.
Approach this work with a beginner's mind.
Mind your blind spots.
Excellent. And everybody always asks, why do we have 10? We only needed 9. But if there is something that you, if you're new to this group, if there's something that you feel you need to feel safe in this space, feel free to chime in and we can definitely add that to our agreements.
Did I would
say it again? All right, seeing nothing, I will move to our mission. Glide's racial justice group educates and seeks liberation for the oppressed and marginalized with emphasis on BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color, for those who are not familiar with that term, in order to realize the beloved community we are called to be. And in doing that work, we're going to this year be focused on 6 initiatives specifically, which are Black trans lives, Black women, food insecurity with emphasis on children, police reform, reparations, and voter suppression. So in all of these avenues, one thing that has come up for us is how do we take care of not only our congregational needs, but then how does that move into Glide's clients and beyond Glide into the greater community? Quote from Minister Marvin is, Glide social justice work should be accessible to our congregation, our clients, and the community. It's just as simple as that. Congregation, clients, community. So with that said, we're going to move in right into the program. Dr. Kenneth Kim is the Senior Director of Programs at Glide Foundation, where he leads the design, implementation, and evaluation of an integrated community engagement and dynamic service system for the homeless and marginalized communities living in San Francisco's Tenderloin neighborhood. He joined Glide as a clinical director in 2015. Kenneth represents Glide as a member of the Community Advisory Committee for TLHIP, San Francisco's Domestic Violence Consortium, as well as other collaborations with Bay Area community-based organizations and city agencies. Kenneth is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in community mental health, foster care system, and treatment of trauma, and has worked in human services for over 20 years. His volunteer training and work experience include, but are not limited to, programs addressing violence prevention, severe mental illness, substance use, psychological evaluation, and crisis intervention. Kenneth is also an advisor for the Korean American Community Foundation of San Francisco and board member at the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation. Kenneth earned his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Wright Institute in Berkeley and bachelor's degree in social work from UC Davis. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen and turn this over to Dr. Kenneth Kim.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to see everyone. Let's see, I am gonna try to move quickly over the overview so that we could have a good discussion. I'm trying something a bit new this time, which is utilizing our board report as, which is slowly beginning to develop into almost like a program's newsletter. I will actually provide this PDF for everybody. I'm gonna just kind of highlight some bullet points over each area. But once we share this, then you can look at it in more detail. Would love some feedback if this is actually a helpful document, and we can make sure to distribute it on a regular basis so everyone here can have a sense of what's going on the program side of Glide. I'll kind of go over its structure to guide you, and then talk about some highlights. So first, we identify any new program leadership, especially these days with the pandemic. We don't get to see each other in the hallways anymore. And so just pointing out who's been joining us. We usually start with the program leadership, but we do include other staff members throughout this report. But we have a new director of harm reduction programs, Juliana DiPietro, comes to us through Boston, where she just finished her MPH. And then John Negrete, who is from Northern California. He's Native American. We're really excited to have him on board, and he's been doing a lot of work in smaller towns and rural areas. And both of them, I think it's nice to get some experience and knowledge from outside San Francisco to see where we can do some innovation and learning as well. If you have had a chance to be around the block, you will see that the 300 block of Ellis is now closed from Sunday through Friday. Saturday is the only day that it's open. And it's closed during business hours. We actually start pretty early. I think we start around 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. And so this was a great opportunity that we got through the city to start providing our services outdoors. Couple of things that are going on now is obviously the COVID testing that we do on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. from 10 to 4. We've been doing that since about May, June. Currently, we are actually our capacity is supposed to be at 250 tests per day, and I think we've actually been exceeding that on a regular basis. On Mondays, we work with the SF Marin Food Bank to do food distribution, and then we're slowly starting to gain more services. Lava May is back. They're providing shower services on Thursday. There's a couple of others I'm probably forgetting, but there's a website that we've actually developed that you can visit and see what the schedule is and what some of the services are out there. In some ways, this is almost like Project Homeless Connect outdoors instead of being at Bill Graham. And Project Homeless Connect, if you're not familiar, is an organization that tries to bring all sorts of services in one place, everything from dog grooming to clinical health services. And so we're trying to operate that on a regular basis outside of Glide. Also want to really kind of focus around events too. So a little bit of Sunday Streets every day is kind of nice. Hopefully soon we'll be figuring out ways to do more outdoor dining as well. But definitely visit the site. It's great to see who our partners are and how things are going. In terms of COVID testing, recently we did partner with San Francisco Community Health Clinic through a DPH funded partnership where they're doing a lot more outreach and engagement of people who are experiencing homelessness, as well as with seniors. And that's where the Curry Center and SF AIDS Foundation is coming on board. And so this is a way for us to actually develop this hub and spoke model with our testing site being the hub and then these outreach teams being the spokes. We are creating a new position that is a COVID testing coordinator to help with all of that and making sure that folks that are tough to reach and engage get expedited testing done, and then their case managers and navigators help out with services and resources if they do test positive for COVID. And then in terms of our, the two main things in our strategic initiatives that I'm responsible for is around integrated services model and then mobile services. And I'll actually touch upon that more in kind of forward-facing goals. But one of the things that I highlighted here is what we call CCTs or care coordination team meetings. I think that's always been an informal effort where people get together and talk, but we really wanted to make this, a deeper and more robust process. So care coordination itself isn't very new, but they tend to be used in more medical settings or clinical settings. And we're trying to figure out how to do that where we can include folks on the safety team, all the way to, external medical professionals that work with us. Some of this we've been able to pilot actually through our withdraw from care process, where when we had folks in the building, if there was any violent incidents, we would use restorative justice practices, but really kind of think about it as a team. So who has a relationship with this individual? Is this something that happens on a regular basis? Is there anything happening in this person's life that might actually have sparked this incident from happening that isn't normally what they go through? So some of that we've been able to really develop through that process that we'll be adding on to our services. With the daily free meals, we really highlighted the holidays this year. I don't think there's a day that I don't use the word pivot about 100 times. And that certainly, filled what happened with the holidays. When we started meeting for planning, which we started late, normally we get started around March, but weren't able to start until the summertime. We started thinking about what is the impact we want to make with the holidays this year. And I love the fact that the team came up with this idea that for everything we have to take away for COVID, we want to replace it with one or more new things. So we weren't able to do, congregate dining inside, but we added, this outdoor dining experience. And the team was ingenious. We actually had, I don't know if you can see, it's just a small picture, but we had small cafe-like tables for one, with just one seat, unless folks came in as a pod, then we would actually add seats for them and had volunteers serve meals. It was a great event. Unfortunately, with the Thanksgiving surge, we weren't able to continue that for Christmas. Some old traditions still were there. Joe Betts joined us to provide the prime rib dinner. In terms of grocery bag giveaway, rather than doing a distribution on the street, we focused on delivery. And this meant that we could actually increase our partnership with other neighborhood organizations. And I think that was great because it meant that how we showed up was really around anchoring everybody and not just showing up as Glide and doing this work. So we actually increased our partnership, I believe, from 7 to 19. Don't hold me on that first number. The second one I definitely know. Oh, sorry, 10. So we increased from 9 to 19. And this also included new partnerships with the toy bag giveaway. If any of you were around for the holidays last year, we actually did this like toy wonderland over at the Hilton, and definitely missed doing that for children and families. But being able to distribute toy bags actually allowed us to be a lot more focused. It actually saved us some money so we could get some more toys. And so this is the distribution and bagging effort that we did. Again, the team, I really have to credit them. They were brilliant. In each one of these pews are toys that are specific to age groups. And then we got to know the families, the children a little better, and they filled out a little survey telling us about what they liked, what they were interested in. And then the small amount of volunteers that we had actually went through and did some shopping for these kids. And so that meant they read the card, learned about them, and then got to choose what toys went into the bag. There's about 3 to 4 toys per bag, including some like little extra goodies that were like stocking stuffers for them. And then we got to go across the city. We actually hit the Mission, Bayview, Excelsior, hit a lot of spots to deliver these toys. Also want to highlight Jeffrey's Toys, which is a small local shop in Union Square that we also supported by buying about $6,000 worth of toys. And we're really hurting this year, as you guys can imagine. And we'll probably be in a very similar situation next winter, and we'll join them again. There's some photos of the efforts over the holidays. With the walk-in center, they have really shifted now that we don't do congregate shelter reservation. We have focused on COVID testing. And they have also continued to provide supplies and rental assistance, all the other services that are there. And most likely in terms of developing a health access point, which I'll talk more about later, the walk-in center is pivoting in that way, which is great. Community safety team. I mean, they've been there all along. I mean, they are so much our anchors, and they have shifted from their usual activities into supporting line management. One of the things that have come up recently is how important their presence is around sort of healthcare. Their ability to talk about COVID testing is really helpful with those casual conversations that happen like in the meals line. And then we've also been really successful in getting a lot of our frontline staff vaccinated. And so they can speak firsthand. And so when someone mentioned around the medical mistrust that's been going on with vaccines, one of the things that we've learned through different surveys and efforts is that talking to somebody you know about the vaccine is just as impactful as talking to a medical professional around that vaccine. So for our staff to be able to say, what their process was in making that decision and what their experience was like is probably going to, is likely to be a really big factor in getting more folks in the TL vaccinated. Community engagement volunteer program. We work really closely with them in their programs this year. We had much less volunteers this year, but we actually had a lower amount of attrition. Normally it's about 40%, but only had 21%. And we also do surveys every year to see what their experience are. And so this was a really good outcome for us to see that the changes in events didn't impact the experience that folks had. If anything, what we lost were a lot of the corporate volunteers. But what we still maintain with the folks that have been committed to Glide over the years. And so I think that was a really nice development for us. I can't say enough about Thanksgiving. It was a moment where I got to see a volunteer having a conversation with somebody sitting at the table and dining. And I pulled, I think, Lillian over and was just like, this is what I miss. This was the interaction, between community members coming together that I miss so much. I really hope we are able to figure this out so that we're doing this on a daily basis and not just waiting for the holidays to do it, but we shall see. Maybe in the next time I report to you guys, there'll be some updates around that. A harm reduction program has also done a lot of pivoting. One of the good sort of silver linings around the pandemic is we brought the syringe access services out from the 6th floor and brought it to Taylor Gate, and now we're talking about moving it into the hub. But they have been, very consistent And we've definitely seen a lot more numbers in eliminating the time and space that it takes to get up to the 6th floor for those services. We are not going back to the syringe accesses, going back to the top floors. We're going to figure out how to continue having them downstairs. And it also lends itself to a lot of really great integration between all the different programs because they're now working on the 1st floor together. Testing and navigation services are slowly starting to come back. One of the things that we've been working on with DPH is actually providing HIV, Hep C, and STI testing in the SIP hotels. And so that's been really great to be able to work with folks that have housing right now, but typically folks that have long-term and chronic homelessness. And then the opt-in van has been, really powerful in getting all the services out there. In the first few months of the pandemic, we were providing tents and masks and just a ton of supplies where a lot of services had to, scale back because of concerns around safety. Our team, figured it out really early on and was able to continue those services. Now it's a fairly regular thing for us to provide food through opt-in. I can say that we are in the process now of purchasing 2 more vans, so we will officially have a fleet. We're actually getting a larger cargo van to be able, that's a little bit more conducive to providing services in the van. And then we're getting a transport vehicle to start helping people get from wherever they're staying to medical services or behavioral health services. And so it'll be 2 large cargo vans and 1 minivan. So really excited about that. A part of the service that we've added on to opt-in and will be continuing to develop is using telehealth. So we were asked by DPH to partner with them. We were provided with 3 iPads. So basically how that works is we ask folks if they're interested in a medication-assisted treatment. If they are, we then use the iPad and Zoom to connect them up with a nurse practitioner or an MD. And then they kind of go off on their own, they get their screening, and at the end, we'll have a prescription that we then help them fill either at the pharmacy at 1380 Howard or another pharmacy that's there. We are now working on a proposal to get more funding to actually expand this service and likely to kind of build it in with all the other services like Glide so that we make sure that folks can get access to folks that are here in our building through Zoom. So I think that's going to be really exciting to see as we move on. Men in Progress and the Violence Intervention Program, we have seen some great numbers once we moved over from the Man Alive to the Duluth model. We're seeing a lot more retaining of folks. We switched over to virtual groups like everybody else. And while there was a small percentage of folks that lost access because of technology issues, we actually grew quite a bit. So you see here, like from 2018 to 2019, we grew to 181 participants from 51. But with the pandemic, we only decreased down to 122. So it's actually a pretty small percentage given what's happening. And then, plans for this year is to try to create a K Men in Progress, which we're excited about, and a fathers group. One of the things that came up was we were getting a lot more referrals from CPS with fathers who were referred for anger management. And it's actually the participants themselves that said, this was great for us, but we'd like to continue and do something that's specifically for dads. Can you help us with that? So we're in the process of designing that for them. The Women's Center has gone through a huge overhaul. We're actually shifting. We're going to continue the support services we've always had, but we're actually going to try to partner with other providers. Like before the pandemic, we actually worked with the Healing Well, which is a small organization here in the Tenderloin that does meditation, mindfulness, yoga for the Tenderloin community. Our partnership started with them doing a writing workshop that looks at specifically trauma and through poetry. And the woman who was actually running it was a former Women's Center client, actually. So that was kind of a nice happen chance. What we will be focusing on instead is a lot of what we're calling rapid support services. So getting people into shelters and services as quickly as possible. The pandemic definitely has slowed us down, but Shannon Wise, our new women's center manager, has been doing a great job of, making connections and providing outreach. And so here are some of the efforts that she made with that. The Family Resource Center has probably done the most pivoting. I had talked with Marvin around your interest on family and food security. One of the new services that we created through the FRC because of the pandemic was a food pantry. A lot of the meals that are prepared regularly does not meet the cultural competency for our Latinx families, as well as our Muslim and Arabic speaking families. So being able to provide pantry items allows them to cook for their families rather than just looking for prepared meals. And so that's something we've done. The other piece that we've added on is through a partnership with the HSA, Human Services Agency. Any families that have positive COVID testing, we're able to connect them up with Instacart so that they have food delivered to them, as well as connecting them up with other services. So bringing Teresa Calderon, who's the FRC manager, in to talk about that is probably would be really helpful, I think, in your efforts to kind of see what's been going on the ground on the program side of things. I love this picture. We actually switched over our harvest dinner from Freedom Hall into prepared meals that families came and picked up. And Teresa had this brilliant idea of using social media to connect families together. So a lot of them shared pictures about their meals and talked about their meals. What's been surprising around our parent groups through Zoom is it's this really sweet spot between doing a home visit and then having them come over. We've been seeing a lot more dads. Unfortunately, some of it is because they're not working, but otherwise it's because they don't have an excuse about why they're not coming to FYCC anymore. We're like showing up in their living rooms, and they get to control what we see and don't see. But some of the things that have come up is like just seeing some moms cooking empanadas during a support group got into this major conversation about what's the right way of making empanadas, which I feel like was a loss that I didn't get to join in that. But a lot more intimacy is actually coming out through these virtual meetings rather than more distance. So, that's been fairly consistent and good. With the Family, Youth, and Childcare Center, the after school program has pivoted over to providing a learning hub. So this means that those students that are doing virtual learning but don't have supervision at home get to come to this community hub and then do their virtual learning there. We have included other activities, and what you guys are seeing a picture of is the current hub is actually at the Marriott up on Post. And normally we hire different consultants come and do activities like Blueberry Music and Play Well. But in this case, the Marriott Kitchen actually did a cooking class for the students, which I thought was really sweet. The first day that they had the hub, they did a great job of really welcoming the students. So normally when you see conferences at hotels, they set up the big sign welcoming members. Well, this time instead, they were welcoming all the TL students that were coming in. So that's actually been, again, another silver lining around these activities. Lastly, with childcare, they have been pressing on. They have definitely had to do a lot of pivoting. There's a smaller number of kids. I think with the preschool and toddlers, it's really hard to do social distancing. But they've been very creative with all the different activities. Unfortunately, during the winter, they haven't been able to use the roof, but the roof has become a really important asset as well. But they've been pressing on with both in-person activities as well as virtual activities. So that's kind of an overview. There's a lot I didn't go over, but I'm sure you guys will have questions on that. And then really quickly, I'm just gonna share some of the things that I'm working on this year. To give you guys a bit of a preview. This I won't be sharing because it is in draft form, but once it's a final form, then I'll definitely share to give you guys some ideas of what's going on. So in terms of the integrated program model, some of the things that I'm working on with my team is implementing Empath, which is a really interesting model coming out of Boston that helps children and families become more self-sufficient. And they are known for their integration of trauma-informed approaches and neuroscience. So one of the things that gets missed quite often, you guys may have heard, where people are given appointments to come and see their case manager or their therapist, but they don't make it to their appointments. And so one of the things that this model looks at is executive functioning. So when you have had chronic trauma or severe trauma, how does that impact your ability to remember things? If we think about how challenging it is for us just to multitask, imagine how hard it is to keep in, your kids, all the other demands, and all the while you're thinking, how do I survive this? How do I survive this? So this model really takes all that into consideration so that the services that are provided have a better impact. We're also developing new tools to really measure our outcomes and impact. The GLIDE status assessment is a tool that I'm working on with the Center for Applied Learning, CAL Institute. I think that's Cali. Super excited about that. But it is a tool that is being GLIDified, which I love. Like all of our program staff are going through it, changing language, challenging a lot of concepts that might actually support white supremacy. I think all the things that are happening right now, it's pretty exciting to be able to take all of that, turn it into a tool, and actually procure some data that has social justice elements to it. The health access point. So we used to have Glide Health Services, which was a fairly qualified health clinic. And then we transferred it over to Health Right 360. Now Health Right 360 is gone. So what are we doing? Well, instead of managing a clinic, which is really tough, instead what we're doing is creating a health access point where we are going to start partnering with different medical providers to come. So it's almost like a pop-up kitchen or pop-up restaurant. We can operate the site, but we don't have to have the chef or the cooks. We just need to know how to operate it and let the different medical providers come and, a different day of the week provide different services. COVID testing is definitely our anchor. We did a flu clinic, a pop-up flu clinic for the first time in December where we learned a lot. And now we're getting ourselves ready to help with the COVID vaccination. So fingers crossed that we will actually be providing COVID vaccination out on our Tend to Learn resource hub. And we just purchased a pharmacy grade refrigerator to get ourselves ready for that. So lots to come around that particular project. TL resource hub I talked about. And then women and children of color is a focus as well. And that's part of the reason why we're implementing this empath model. The other piece that I'll be looking at after we integrate the first empath model is this other model called Intergen that comes from them. And basically what that does is that rather than providing services just to the parent or just to the child, it looks at how services can be tailored so that it impacts the generations that are there. And so if we have multiple generation families, how do we, take long histories of trauma or systemic trauma and address that so the next generation has, more of a chance to succeed. And so I think that's going to be another exciting element. Talked about I think all of these things I covered already. Community safety team, with the mobile services, we are looking at redesigning the safety team. So we actually have our traditional model that are going to be focused more on meals and events. And then we're looking at developing a whole mobile team. And so we're taking all the best parts of our safety team, but adding on the skills around community health outreach workers, as well as specific training around de-escalation and crisis intervention. And then I talked a little bit about mobile services, more cars. We purchased a food cart this last year. We're in the process of purchasing a van, and we'll be piloting that soon, right out on our block. And then we've been working with the SIP hotels. Part of this is a lot of the street level low threshold case management. We're getting into that mix. So when you hear about alternatives to police funding and more mental health services, right now the harm reduction program and the Women's Center are piloting that. And then Glide Goods. Glide Goods had to shut down because of the pandemic, and now we're revisiting that to provide supplies in a mobile model so we don't have to worry about people coming in. And so the main three areas that we'll look at is seasonal items. So when it's hot, what can we provide to help people cool down? When it's cold, how do we get them sheltered? Safety equipment, one of the things that have come up like in the areas around Bayview are fires because folks are cooking. So how do we provide some cooking equipment? And then pet supplies. Pets are such an important part for people to maintain their sense of safety as well as their mental health. We definitely want to focus on that as well. And hopefully all of that will be volunteer-based that could give people workforce development opportunities as well. So learning how to use Square might be able to get you into a cafe or a restaurant service. even learning about inventory and managing that can also hopefully get you a job in all the retail, not retail, but service industry as well. So all that is very early on, but things to come for the new year. So that's a lot of information. I will stop there for now and definitely take questions. But yeah, there's a lot going on. Oh, I am unable to see the chat when I'm presenting, so I'll definitely take it here if there's any questions.
Okay, so I don't think I didn't see any, I saw
Nope.
nothing but praises in the chat. If you don't want to ask your questions aloud, please feel free to use the chat feature for that. Otherwise, if you could use the reaction just to raise your hand. If you can't figure any of that out physically, just raise your hand and we can start there and I'll call on you. Tatiana.
I just gotta say again, that was amazing. And I'm totally inspired, and I really appreciate the thoroughness, and oh my goodness. Okay, so, and thank you. So I'm Paula, this might be to you. I'm not sure about the protocol about this. So Linda Cummins and I are working on it, a project around Black transgender people. So Paula, am I allowed to talk to Kenneth?
I don't know. Kenneth, is she allowed to talk to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That actually is great. I can say that our harm reduction team, one of the things that we're talking about is I am now also on the board of St. Francis Memorial Hospital. They are known for their gender affirmation services, and they have been talking about needing to support more marginalized communities, specifically around medication access and how to get them to their treatments, especially when they, drop off. Now, this was something that is familiar to our harm reduction team, especially around Hep C navigation, right? How to find people again and engage them back. And so doing this for, gender affirmation processes isn't that far of a reach, and something we definitely want to engage in. So part of ours looking at medication support is, can we also provide med storage, med distribution? We're looking at what it takes to be a pharmacy tech, and if that's a way that we can also create new positions around that. But we definitely are thinking about supporting the trans community around that, and feel that we need to do more around it. So absolutely happy to talk about that and see where we can kind of align some efforts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah?
Hi, I also am very impressed with everything, particularly same day Suboxone. I know that there are a lot of regulatory hurdles to get through dealing with Suboxone and stuff. I'm very impressed. A very trivial, not trivial, but a very detailed perspective that I'm sure you guys already have thought through. Even if you have a pharmacy grade refrigerator, having a backup plan. I work at San Francisco General, or I did until a couple weeks ago, and we would do a lot of running vaccines, just regular vaccines from one floor to another, back to the hospital building, et cetera.
Yeah, I hear you. Actually, that was all the details that we learned when we tried to do the flu vaccine. We had to learn about recording temperatures, how to operate a cooler. Yeah, and that really is just the start. One of the things that have also really improved a great deal is, if you guys know of Lee Hansen, she's the director of institutional partnerships. And I think that's such a nice shift that Glide in the fund development department made. Instead of looking at how do we get corporate money, it's more of how do we get these institutions, whether they're corporate or not, to then get into a relationship with us so that we can grow together. So something that's new that's come up is there is a group called the Life Sciences Cares, which is like a coalition of different pharmaceutical and biomed companies that want to give back. And there's a Bay Area chapter that just got formed. And so we're really hoping that the Health Access Point and this group we can grow together, and that they can, get regular funding. But they also have, a ton of staff and know-how to help us with this. We also, started a partnership with forward.This at UCSF. They were interested in doing a pop-up clinic and came to us to say, hey, can we create a pop-up clinic with you in the TL? So we've got the right partners to really develop all the medical processes that we need. And in some ways, we're starting from scratch because everything that happened with Light Health Services and Tenderloin Health Services left with them. I think that's not a bad thing because I'm hoping that there's room for innovation. So then we have St. Francis close by. Like I mentioned, we have Curry Senior Center has an FQHC, so does St. Anthony's. We're doing a lot of conversations with them. And then San Francisco Community Health Clinic used to be API Wellness, and they were also really like an anchor clinic for gender affirmation in the transgender community. So we're super excited about partnering with them. And so obviously what we're trying to do here is not have all of our eggs in one basket, but how do we create all these partnerships where we're taking the best of what they do, but also hopefully there's kind of mutual benefits that we can grow together, like this pop-up clinic having a second site. The other partnership we have, which is a clinic called Transitions Clinic Network. It's funded through DPH and UCSF, and they focus on how to turn FQHCs into more friendly spaces for folks that were in long-term incarceration. And so if an FQHC applies for this funding, they get the technical assistance to improve the quality of their healthcare and service system, but also a requirement is for them to develop community health outreach workers specifically for those that were in incarceration for long term. So that's another one of the partners that we've got kind of lined up for this health access point. Yeah, but a lot of work ahead. I definitely feel you. I had to run around getting an EpiPen just to get our clinic going because that's not something we normally have. And so, getting the prescription, running down to Walgreens to get the EpiPen. We had to get a couple of cots. All sorts of things that we had to learn. But luckily, it didn't actually make us afraid. It actually excited us more, which I knew. Okay, so we're on the right track. If the walk-in center, the safety team, all of those guys that you guys are familiar with, where they are serving meals, are now starting to get into the flow of providing medical services. So it's fascinating. Yeah.
Yes, and I just know from experience that even the medical grade, pharmacy grade, refrigerator, freezer can go out on you, can go out of your range. I'm like, that's their only job.
Yeah. No, there are so many details. Yeah, no, I there's a lot. And yeah, I think from your experience too, this is probably where, bringing volunteers back, how do we collaborate on these things? I think there'll be a lot of opportunities. So I appreciate that.
Speaking of which, first, before I ask you this next question, what is the FQAC?
Federally qualified health clinic. So there are different categories of how community-based clinics operate, and federally qualified is probably the ones that are qualified to take Medicare and Medi-Cal. And then there's community clinics that may not require or rely on government-funded insurance to pay for their services, but instead run on donations. Oftentimes they have like volunteer medical professionals operating those. There are church-based community clinics as well. These are all kind of models that exist out there, and we're trying to create one that is very similar to a community clinic where we're not relying on government funding. The last thing I want us to have is a billing department. I think instead we want to basically host those that are going to take Medi-Cal and Medicare to serve folks. But also, how do we then use Glide's resources to come up with more unrestricted funding so that we can reduce the barriers to health access? The other thing that we are starting to do a lot more is working with right now we're starting with the pediatric department of UCSF, but we're starting to do a lot of integration with their residents. And so that's an opportunity. Hopefully we can actually be a site for residents that may be this kind of new innovative community model where they can come and get trained. That's a few years away, but I think that's what we would love to see in the future.
So some of the things that have come up, it sounds like are definitely in alignment with some of the projects that the group is researching and launching. I don't know if each of you would like to talk a little bit about what you're doing and ask specific questions. about that. But we've taken the 6 initiatives that we've identified, and everybody has kind of honed in on 1 or 2 that they really want to do programming, advocacy, partnership, outreach around. And everybody's kind of going and doing their own thing and coming back to the group. So it's a little bit different model for us as we figure out how we want to move forward. How do you imagine us being able to access or do needs assessments with each of these individual programs? Like, say, for instance, you mentioned that you were planning on finding a new partnership for the Women's Center and children with yoga and meditation specifically. That is actually one of the programs that we have on our list, which was how do we use like congregational groups, which we have a meditation program, we have a yoga program. How can we get the Women's Center to integrate into those services? So even if, say, for instance, you do bring in another partner, if they missed that particular yoga session, or maybe they just really like the style of these other programs, that they could access that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for conversation to be had. I mean, this is something that, Marvin and I talk about, where, this kind of wall has come down between programs and church that I don't think is necessary. But I think it has partly been because of that separation and not having the right settings and meetings to collaborate and to talk. So with each of these, I would say there's a lot of opportunities. So with Black Trans Lives, the harm reduction team is probably a great place to start, since they are really kind of focusing and advocating for doing more for the trans community. With Black women, there's a couple of opportunities. One would be the Women's Center. Part of the reason why we hired Shannon is that she was a case manager, and she primarily worked in the Bayview. And that's something we found is if we're gonna serve women of color and their children, and specifically Black and African American women, they tend to be in the Bayview. So she's got a lot of familiarity there that we're really excited about. She also started her own 501c3 that was specifically around supporting women of color. So a lot you guys can talk about with her. And then with Sandra Haggerty, who is the manager for the violence intervention programs, one of the things she's working on, in addition to the TAG group and the Fathers group, is also creating an MIP for women called Women Overcoming Violence. When she was in the Women's Center, she actually provided some services in the county jail, San Francisco City Jail. She was in BPOD for a couple months, and we were just learning what it would mean. And the most popular service that we provided in there was Women Overcoming Violence. So it's based on the Duluth model, which is a violence intervention program based on popular education. So there's lots of theories to go back on, but it's very much about peer support. So I would talk to her and see what she is up, and I think there's probably a lot of opportunities there. Food insecurity with emphasis on children. So definitely want to talk to George and Jocelyn, as well as Teresa from FRC. The food cart idea, the ultimate vision for that is that we drive it out to food deserts, and we use environmentally friendly methods to provide shelf-stable food. So if you have gone to Whole Foods or any of those co-op, you usually see large bins with grains. And so what we want to try to create is something like that, where we can provide environmentally friendly containers, and they would just come out and get what they need from these large storage containers, which is not that far from, when you think about in less developed countries, how the food cart comes to the neighborhoods and people come out. It's really the same idea. We just are bringing it into modern times, but how do we reduce containers and waste by getting the food right into larger containers that people can then take from? So a part of that is around self-sufficiency and serving children and families. So I would recommend talking to both of them. Police reform. So I do need to update my bio, because I represent GLIDE on the Alternatives to Police Funding Steering Committee that the mayor has put together. I'm also on the Board of Supervisors Drug Dealing Task Force. And so a lot of that intersects with police reform. So I would be the person to talk to about what's going on in those areas. And then reparations and voter suppression, that's definitely CSJ. We're not doing anything on those 2 areas. I can't help you there.
No.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say just getting meetings together. I mean, Marvin and I are starting to talk. And so, I think it's the same. I think there's a lot of parallel processes that you can do. And then you can rely on me to make those introductions. We also have a couple of meetings that could be helpful. One is the program leadership team meeting, which is basically all the directors and managers. They meet once a week on Wednesdays from 10 to 11:30. And then because we've grown, we're actually about 12, 13 people now. There's also a senior program leadership team meeting, which is just all the directors. And so there's about 5 of us. And there we're able to talk more strategy and do a lot more reflective leadership type of discussion. So I would say if you are interested in kind of strategic level, then I would meet with the directors. If you're looking at more on the ground, taking some action, then the program leadership team is a great place to come and make your pitch and see what might be available there. But the easy answer is just contact me and I'll direct you in the right way if I'm not it.
Questions from the floor? Sarah?
Hi. So we've been talking about doing a community forum for Glide and maybe other congregations or other community groups online around answering questions about kind of vaccine concerns, particularly in the African American community. And Marvin had mentioned that there were staff who had concern about the vaccines, that someone came to do education with them. And I was wondering who that was and if they might be good on a community forum.
Yeah, there is a group out of UCSF. We were approached by these couple doctors from the emergency room department. But they have put together a curriculum, which I piloted first with all the program managers, and they liked it. It was very accessible. And so they are going out and doing these talks. They prefer to do larger groups because they are pulling from UCSF faculty to do this, so they want to have a larger impact. But I believe HR, Barbara specifically from HR arranged this, but we were able to also get an Ask the Nurse series. And so where, it was kind of like a Q&A brown bag lunch kind of setting where our staff can ask those information. And then we asked for medical professionals of color. So there was representation there. So those are the approaches that we took so far. I can definitely provide you guys with the contact information for that person. But they are definitely also looking at faith-based organizations to help with this. So I think it would be a good fit for what you guys are trying to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Sarah, for the, I am terrible with acronyms, so please do not hesitate to stop me. I don't even realize how much I use them. So.
Oh, yeah, and I was working at General when they went through the process of their outpatient clinics becoming FQHC. So I'm like, oh yeah, I know that acronym.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a tough one.
A question from Fiona.
Yeah, it's maybe a bit of a silly question, but first of all, I wanted to just say, oh my God, this is so amazing. Everything that Glide's doing, I'm so inspired.
Thank you.
And yeah, my silly question is, where do you get all the energy? I want to be able to do everything you're doing.
I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, it'd be amiss for me not to credit the team. I mean, I do feel like I was able to, at this point, assemble a really great team, but it was hard. I will definitely admit that, from March until July, I was doing 4 or 5 jobs and needed people to remind me to eat lunch. It's definitely has been hard, but all of it is a labor of love. And I think, the programs team as a whole are just so committed. I've been nothing but impressed with how they just continue to show up. So in some ways, I just need to, create a safe space for them to be creative and support them, and then give, really help work with them to kind of provide the vision that we're all striving for, and then they make it all happen, day to day. Yeah, in some ways, I kind of having so much to do, I do miss getting to just hang out with the team. I think when I was clinical director, it was a nice break because I didn't have anybody reporting to me. I just was like this internal consultant. And so it meant that I got to just hang out with staff and learn what was going on and get the inside scoop. And I have to admit, I do miss those days. I am chained to Zoom most of my days. So just kind of hanging out with them is a huge loss for me. But I don't know. I mean, maybe someday I'll reflect and figure it out. But at this point, I just love what I do and I'm excited about the next opportunities. I just keep going at it.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. If this group, in the past, we have done things, not necessarily racial justice specifically, but just in the congregational life groups, things like sock drives and toiletry drives and things like that. Is that something that's still needed? And if so, are there particular times where of the year, because we're planning on a quarterly basis how we roll out our initiatives. So
Yeah.
are there better times than others for those if they're needed?
Yeah, I think with Glide Goods, that's where we're trying to get a little bit more organized on our end what we need. So Eunice Feathers, who's the walk-in center manager, I think if we were to go into a dystopian world, she would be operating the underground market for all of us. Because I don't know how she does it, but she's been able to get like Keen shoes. We were giving those out for a while. We had Lucky brand jeans that were, I mean, some good quality stuff that we're handing out. Unfortunately, we're just not built for storage and providing this food. So I think what you guys are thinking about, like very targeted efforts, is right on. As soon as we get it, we want to get it out there as quickly as possible. So we're gonna, in the next few months, get together some workshops to re-envision the walk-in center. And I think that would be a great time for us to talk, because as we're kind of envisioning how does a walk-in center better manage goods and supplies, and so that we've got all the logistics and the distribution systems we need, that's where I think we can do a lot of coordination. And I think that's going to be exciting too, because folks that are involved will see immediate impact. So as soon as you're getting that together, we're not letting it sit and waiting until the opportunity comes up. I think we can coordinate it so that it's going right out the door. But I would say have a meeting with Eunice around that, because she can tell you exactly what she needs. But I would say the whole gamut is like targeted things like pet supplies. That's huge. People are required to have muzzles at times. Those get lost. Leashes, food bowls. I mean, just if you go through like Petco, all the accessories you see are all the accessories that folks that are experiencing homelessness could use for their pets as well. There may also be opportunities to do some targeted things around the SIP hotels. The one thing that we're getting from folks is that the food is terrible. So we're starting to find ways to kind of support that. But there's a lot of goods and supplies that folks could use while they're in the SIP hotels that is small, but I think really impactful.
Where are they eating in the shelter-in-place hotels?
I think they're getting food through, I can't remember who the distributor is, but it's kind of like a airline food kind of grade, things that our clients hated when we weren't able to prepare food ourselves. I think it's very similar, but I'm not sure. I'll have to ask George where we're getting that from. But it's definitely not Glide quality food that they're getting. So
do we have a list of what hotels are there that those folks are using? And
we do.
Are there direct, like, do they have like a building manager that's over each hotel, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the two people that you would want to talk with is Jason Norelli, who is the navigation services manager. He's overseeing the harm reduction SIP hotels. I don't know if you knew that, Linda, or not, but Jason's a manager now. And then Shannon is operating for the Women's Center SIP Hotel Advocates to provide those services. So they're just starting to get kind of an understanding. They've already identified all the hotels they'll be serving and the agencies that manage those hotels, so they would know. I could see a meeting coming together between the church and programs to just kind of powwow about what might be needed and then figuring out steps from there. Yeah, and then even opt in. I mean, there is very specific needs to the encampments that we're serving. And they probably have a list of supplies they would need. So that particular discussion would be a number of folks. It wouldn't be just one or two. I would say Eunice, walk-in center manager, women's center manager, harm reduction manager could all get involved in that. And then if you wanted to focus on children and families, that's still a continuing need. Most of there's data that I can't remember off the top of my head that we had about how many of our FYCC and FRC families were impacted by the service industry shutting down. And I can't remember, but it was a huge number of folks that are unemployed currently. So, family-friendly goods are also, really helpful as well. So, that discussion might be kind of a program leadership team discussion that we can do a little brainstorming, get some ideas for you guys.
Brian, did I see a hand? Nope.
Fiona.
Who is this?
Fiona.
Fiona, yeah.
Yeah, I raised my hand again. So this is kind of an idea that keeps coming into my mind. You showed us the pictures of what was done at Thanksgiving, serving the meal outside. And I keep thinking about offering a breakfast to the children so they can get out of their homes, come get breakfast outside, and then go back and do their homeschooling or whatever. Again, like the Black Panthers would do, the breakfast thing.
Yeah.
So it's just an idea, not that you need any additional ideas, but it just keeps coming to me. So
yeah, I think these ideas are actually great, because if you guys are providing the operations, the labor, then program staff just really need to be the broker or the conduit for that. So when I think about what would work for Teresa, I think the collaboration of, if we're talking about a breakfast, what are the details we need to be aware of? Like, do we want a breakfast that's easy to carry? What are some of the dietary things? Like, it wasn't that long ago that we were still serving hot dogs and we had a lot of Muslim families coming. That was not a good look for us. So I think those are the kind of discussions that are really helpful in figuring those things out. But I think what's hard is when someone comes by and says, here's an idea, see you later, hope Glide does it. That's when we're like, and we'll make a face. But when it's like, we've got 15 people that have time and want to contribute to this, what can we do? Then it's just kind of a matter of like, who is going to help us organize them? What do you have put together? How can we add on to it? And usually I'm the one responsible for making sure, like, managers will let me know, like, even if they're volunteering, this is not a good time for me. But because of integration, you also have more than one doorway. If it doesn't work for FRC, it might work with the Women's Center, because Shannon's also working with moms too. We might need to do that in a mobile effort, or the TL Resource Hub might naturally lend itself for that. If I ask, like, who's coming to the food bank, and we find out it's a lot of families, then that's a perfect time to serve breakfast for children and families. So the other thing you could do is, I'm not sure what I do think the Marriott's providing breakfast for the kids at the hub, but we may be able to connect you up with other hubs that don't have breakfast, because we're all part of a network as well. So there's no shortage of opportunities. I think it's really around, how do we figure out this coordination between the church and programs?
Can you say a little bit more about how the food bank works and how you're utilizing volunteers? Are they just from program, or do you need extra support?
We do not need extra support right now because we don't have a plan yet for bringing back volunteers. I think if the church is operating on its own, then that frees us from thinking of you guys as volunteers. We're just brokering those, activities for you. And the food bank has its own volunteers that it works. They show up with their own. I mean, they've been maintaining their volunteers. I mean, they had a huge loss because of the pandemic, but they've got an army of volunteers that can utilize for that. That may be another good agenda item to discuss, is where are there opportunities to plug folks in.
And I don't see Matt here on the call, but Marvin K. White has his hand raised.
Hey, Ken Kim, it's nice to meet you. Thank you.
We might have maybe a conference in Topeka a couple of years ago. I don't know. You look so familiar.
Yeah, yeah, I have one of those faces. But I'm curious, Ken, of all of the interest and possible initiatives lifted up by congregational life groups tonight, do they all have to in spirituality and religion behind, or can all of these efforts be faith-based and still serve the community?
Yeah, I feel like the faith-based piece of it, I think because you do show up as a community, that's the impact that it has, versus just volunteers. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but if I'm an individual showing up and volunteering, I mean, there's a lot of meaning in that. But when I am one of a group of people that get together, I think there is an attraction to feel like I'm being held. And I kind of think back to when I used to be a case manager, and I accidentally slipped that I had a team that I talked about this particular mom's issue with, and she made this face, and I thought she was going to get angry at me because, like, wait, you've been talking about my business with other people. And so I was like, oh, sorry, was that okay? And she actually started crying because she's like, I can't believe there's 10 or 12 people all concerned about my well-being. And so I think there's something about that it doesn't have to be put behind. But I do think because people have different experiences with organized religion, it's no different than being trauma informed. It's like, how do we make sure that the experience of that individual getting that service is done in a way that we're most sensitive to their needs? And I mean, it doesn't matter what the issue is, we should be doing that all the time anyway. So I think it's a good challenge in some ways to think about it that way, but I don't see any reason why it has to be hidden or suppressed. But I think the sense of community and the fact that these folks that came to serve this meal or to provide these things are together all the time and have a connection between them. It's not their job. It's not, what they've been assigned to do, but they do it because it's a part of how the culture of the community that comes together. I mean, there's nothing that replaces that feeling. And I think it just shows. You don't even have to try. Because once you start talking with somebody, it's like, well, why are you doing this? Like, oh, all of us, we're a community. All these faces you see, that's how we show up when we do this. That has an enormous impact on the people we serve. So, yeah.
I like that a lot. We've talked a little bit about this palliative care model of, nice. Bringing holistic, services, to our clients and to the tenderloin, and a part of that, a certain kind of brokenness that some would call spirituality, and the ways in which, systems of oppression have, broken people. I think coming out of COVID, and coming out of the past administration, the 1 year anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery's killing, the recent news about Elijah McClain's, arrest that was, I just think people's spirit are broken. And so, I really am trying to figure out how, to show up as people who are trying to repair a certain kind of brokenness that might underlie, other things, and to people expressly who need a spiritual, connection to whatever they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I think this also can fit into the police reform issue in some ways, but what we're seeing is like with UCSF's effort to reduce their reliance on the sheriff's department and kind of formal security guards and their crisis teams, um, is including folks that are clergy, chaplains and such, to show up, and that is by design. St. Francis is also doing this. Their crisis team doesn't use they have a caseworker or a social worker, but they don't use a mental health professional with their de-escalation. And a part of that is due to stigma and the fear that when you are dealing with a mental health professional, immediately begins this feeling of, are you going to institutionalize me? Are you going to diagnose me? Are you going to pathologize me? So there is this really unique space that's being developed where if we are trying to provide more services, especially around crises, that it may be better for mental health folks to stay in the background and not come out forward. And then how do we work together so that what feels like pastoral support is this gentle handoff into regular ongoing treatment or therapy. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us, especially once we start bringing in mental health interns. And so how can they kind of learn about integration so they think, wow, I'm working with a church to get folks in and it's working. I mean, I think that's kind of what I would love to see more of. So yeah, lots of opportunity there. And so I think, kind of how you guys have focused around your lay leaders is no different than thinking about peer counselors, where we don't want them to be formal. We want them to be as informal as possible. So it feels like it's genuine kindness that you're experiencing and not, a formal role. I think the trick is, how do we make sure that those individuals are supported to where not like, great, you want to volunteer and deal with crises, go for it. I think how we need to think about de-escalation training. How do we know when our limits are and then know how to hand it off so somebody that is better trained or more experienced can jump in? What does that look like? There's a lot to be created that are processes and scaffolding that should make this a smooth experience for folks. So it just feels like I went from one kind person to another kind person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. It's Ken, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken.
With a K, not with a C.
Great. Thank you so much.
So you know.
Thanks, Marvin. Was there a question from Pam Ward?
Not exactly a question, but an opportunity, I hope. And that is, I facilitate the Keeping It Real group on Sunday afternoons. And we used to serve a large number of people in the Tenderloin. We'd have 20 people in our group in Freedom Hall. Now we primarily are serving people who come to church, solely come to church. And so I want to figure out how to get the people that we had, not the same people that we had, but the same population back into that group. And I don't know how to do it now that we're doing virtual meetings.
I think with a lot of folks, it will have to be in person again. And I think the pivot you want to make is, how do you do those things outdoors? Luckily, like today, we'll get some good weather coming in. But I, sort of mentioned to Marvin around, like we specifically asked for the block to be closed on Sunday through Friday with kind of anticipating that there may be some church activities that want to happen out on the block. But there's still a lot to be figured out. Like we're right now in the process of trying to get the potholes filled, which is not great for folks with mobility issues. The other one I would probably look at is Bodecker Park. There may be some opportunities there to kind of restart the group as a presence, but I would say the hub is probably the best place to start. We, right before Thanksgiving, we brought back the Women's Center bingo and we did it in the parking lot. And we had about 15, 20 folks come back and we saw a lot of familiar faces come back. So that might be the trick, is if you, work with the TL Hub folks, you can get it on the calendar. We can help you do some outreach around it and see who shows up. And then of course it doesn't hurt to have food. I would say that probably is the best way to get that in person back. And then in terms of like, if you are looking for, virtual opportunities, there's a lot of folks that are isolated in SROs. We can talk offline and I can give you some connections where we can see there's a group of UCSF medical students and faculty that meet every week. And we've been focusing on the mental health of folks isolated in SROs. And that might be a great connection to add on to the virtual groups, because a lot of them, I think, do have the internet access to be able to do that.
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
We're coming up on the half hour. Are there any other questions from the floor?
Yes, I do, Paula.
Okay, Martin.
Hi, Ken. So over the last couple of weeks, we submitted, or actually we spoke with Eden. And so I wanted to just go ahead and make a plug for this about the possibility about having church outside in the parking lot. So we're similar to what Pam's, once we figure that out, there might be a way to figure out Pam's, because obviously that normally follows church. And so we're talking about the parking lot, and I just wanted to make a plug in case it makes it your way. And there's a lot of details to figure out, obviously, with safety, we're limited in the amounts of people we can have, some technology, how will we be able to show celebration online, outside, etc. So, but if it does make it your way, I hope you support it favorably. And and I'll definitely try to link up with Pam as well, and maybe for their program they can piggyback off whatever we do. But it's all preliminary. Things take time, as I know, to usually sort out. So
I mean, definitely.
Just to clarify, because I saw some very excited faces, that Martine is talking about the people, not those of us who can access it through internet, but the people who came to Freedom Hall and had Freedom Hall as like a respite during service, that those would be the people who would be served by having church in the parking lot, not that we all get to come as members of the congregation, except we can come to help, was my understanding.
No, correct. Yeah.
I didn't see all the faces, but that's understandable. Lillian is going to be your person for that. I mean, I defer to her a lot because she's just the operations queen. Like, she is both going to be your support and your challenge, and challenge in a good way, because she'll be like, did you think about this? Did you think that? I mean, even as we're talking, I'm seeing all the barriers, especially like with neighbors and the sound and all that. But I would say that the programs team, we felt this, how daunting it was to figure out all the details. And I think being prepared to make space to workshop it, meaning like no idea is a bad idea. How do we just start throwing everything against the wall, seeing what sticks? How do we figure out small pilots to try it? I think that also helps with anybody who's involved. If you try to do it all at once and it doesn't work, then it can feel really defeating. But if we just do incremental pieces of it, how do we kind of scale it to start? That tends to be the right recipe for success. So like with the health access point, we're not trying to start a clinic from day one. Let's do a flu vaccines for a week and see how that goes. What are we going to learn from that? So I think there's a lot of experience we can share around those challenges that would be helpful for your effort. But I will say that there's nothing on our end that we wouldn't want to support this effort.
I really like the idea of the church being part of the hub, and having a space there, because we do have, whether it's via Zoom or Facebook, we have multiple ways in which people can connect to the church on Sundays. The problem is we haven't been out we haven't been out in the street or have had a presence there to be able to invite our folks, many we recognize on our own if we were out there. So so if I can hopefully connect with somebody and start having a presence in the hub versus launching all this immediately, that might be a place to start.
Yeah, I would say just come on by and just see what it looks like. Yeah, I mean, the busiest days are Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because of COVID testing in the food bank. Thursday is a little quieter, but you'll get a sense. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity in space, I think. It's the neighbors and the technology that's going to be hard. And then we're not as present on Sundays. So, that's definitely going to be a gap we'll need to fill. So I think the neighborhood isn't used to as much activities on Sundays. And so how do we do that incrementally to get folks used to it? But it's not impossible. I just think there's a lot to talk about and consider, but I don't think it's impossible.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
I see a hand from Marvin.
Hey again. I was talking to Tori today, and she actually talked about an actual street event. I forgot what she called it though. That was scheduled for, I want to say like March 18th. Like a larger community hub. That might have different representatives out there. I wonder if that might be a space for us to set up, a tent and some lounge chairs or something. Maybe ship in some sand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially because it will probably generate some ideas on how, because we don't know exactly how this is going to come off. It's our first time doing a large event outside of the holidays. But it's our experience with the holidays that make us feel confident. Like basically we're going to take Thanksgiving and do that over again. So we're bringing back the tents, we're giving an opportunity for folks to sit down and eat on their own. So what this is for our City, Our Home, which is Prop C. It's the organization that's come out of Prop C funding. And they're in the process of doing surveys with the community to see what the community would like those dollars to be used. And so they really wanted to get access to the folks on our block. And so that's when, came up with the idea of why don't we do Thanksgiving again? There's 3 parts of the survey. One is learning about what the funds are. And so we'll just use the line. So when people line up to add food, we'll have volunteers talk to them about Prop C in Our City, Our Home. And then once they sit down, then, if they want to, they can engage with somebody with an iPad and complete the survey. And then on their way out, they also want ideas. Like if we didn't ask about it, are there any ideas you have on how the funds should be used? So we're probably going to put together like a wall where people will be given Post-its and pens that are cleaned to write down their ideas and then put them all up. And so we're kind of creating a community presence around the survey instead of just trying to get these survey monkeys or those type of fields. This is something that I have to credit Lillian for, but even with health services, we are trying to think about it as event-based health access. So how do we continue to take these like event strategy to get people what they need as well as fulfill some of the operations that we have? So I think that is a great opportunity to come participate in any way that feels right, but also observe. And that might give you some ideas on how to do the church. I mean, some other things that might be good is while you're trying to figure out the technology, is there a way of, like bringing the ensemble back and doing, singing circles or, that's kind of what I mean about incremental and small is just show up. And if you show up every time, then you're creating a presence. If you're doing small things that don't have to be technological, challenges, you will get different points of view, but just figuring out every Sunday, how do we get 15 or 20 people just to show up? What are some very simple things we can do? That will also get the neighborhood ready for it. Before you start putting up the PAs, if you just have a cappella singing out on the street every Sunday, it will help the neighbors get acclimated to your presence. So those are the kind of things that we often talk about to think about these kind of operations and processes.
Well, you remind one of the innovations that Martin and Pam, our Freedom Hall church leaders, we started a prayer basket, and we were actually writing the prayers for folks who didn't have, of, so we were actually transcribing for folks to the table and tell us what they wanted to go into the prayer basket. But it also served as a way to understand what was on the minds and what folks were going through. We still use the prayer basket. I think we've been in a couple meetings where I've read the prayers just to ensure that folks knew like all the things that people were dealing with.
Yeah.
But that might be something,
Yeah,
to show
I
up
love
with
that
as
idea.
well.
Yeah, when we did the De la Muertos, we did a shrine outside. This was something that Teresa had done for FRC every year, but she always kept it small in FYCC. And then so when she moved over to 3:30, she's like, you know what? I'm gonna go big this year. I'm gonna get as much staff as possible involved. I'm gonna put it out on the sidewalk. And we're like, yeah, do it. And so much of our staff loved that because it was just nice to come together. And I think even for the Black Lives Matter event that we did out, that was I think another good example of how just showing up to offer support is enough. And then you can kind of let things happen organically, keeping it small. But I think that is a really great idea to try out.
Great.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add about myself, just so you guys kind of have a sense of where I'm coming from. The way I ended up at Glide was over 20 years ago when I was at Davis doing my undergrad. I had a field study class where they took 20 of us and put us in the TL for a week, and we stayed at the Renoir, which was an SRO. I had to share a bed, a twin bed with one of my classmates. And then the two experiences that I had, we visited all these different organizations and learned about the services in the city. But the two most influential experiences was one, spending the night with the night ministry. I walked around with them with a couple of other students, and that completely changed my career path to coming to the TL. And then coming to Sunday celebration. The last day was on Sunday, where we served meals in the morning and then did the 11 o'clock service. So all of the stuff we're talking about is not familiar to me because I wouldn't have actually ended up in this work in an urban area if it wasn't for coming to the TL. It just took me 20 years to get there, but once I arrived, it's like this stuff is actually pretty seamless from my point of view. That I don't think the church needs to be separate from the kind of services and activities that are needed in this community. It's just, how do we do it? How do we figure it out? And I will say for programs, as you can see with all the stuff we've been doing, in some ways, the pandemic has accelerated these changes, somehow has opened us up to be able to, take down the framework and go, why not? I mean, nothing else is working. So this is a great opportunity to try some of these things. Yeah, be fearless about it. I would highly encourage you guys to be fearless about it.
And
Great. Thank you, Ken.
we are at 6:35. Ken, do you have time for one more question? I see Pam's hand.
Yeah.
Actually, two. I have one last question for you. Pam?
I just wanted to say that the ministry and the music is the soul of Glide, but the choir, the fastest way to spread COVID is singing.
Yeah, that's true.
Out loud.
That is true.
So that, that's, it's terrible, but that's not really a possibility right now.
Yeah, damn it.
Well, we're also talking about a quarterly rollout, so it's not possible right now, but doesn't.
But maybe they could pump in music from some other source.
Yeah, it's a good challenge. I mean, like I said, it'd be great to do some workshops. I mean, once you talk with Eden and get to Lillian, again, I think I would really encourage you guys to make space where like no idea is a bad idea, see what sticks. But at the same time, yeah, these are the challenges we run into a lot too. And it's all the little things that we don't think about. So tough.
Well, I have a big thing I'm wondering if you think about. Well, I'm sure you do. And I'm sure there are many answers to this question for you. But what would you say is the most glaring racial justice issue for you as you see it with programs, as you do your day-to-day, that comes up for you most often?
Health access is the one that's the biggest. I think someone had mentioned earlier in the check-in around how if you have a good reason to refuse the vaccine and you might think that the person is just refusing the vaccine, but there's actually a fear behind it. I mean, this is just the case with all of the services. Luckily, DPH is starting to create a culture where they're no longer saying that people are service resistant. That was a phrase that was often used that I would have to then take on the advocacy role of maybe your service isn't that good and that's why they're not coming. It's not because they're resistant to your services. It's just that it's not the quality that they actually want. And this paradigm permeates everything around care and support and needed. So everything that's related to, even like talking about drug dealing and the economic factors of why a drug market exists, access. I mean, there's just so many things around access and safety, and it's all about equity. That's just my world. That's what I talk about every day is how do we create more equity, and then and then I would say where I'm on the fringe is like even in my most recent conversation with St. Francis leadership, I drew this parallel. They asked me like, well, what are some of the challenges of making an institution into a healing organization to be better trauma informed? What are the barriers you run into with leadership? And my example was, well, it's kind of like talking about white supremacy. You just don't realize how much trauma you're creating or how much, support you're putting towards racist processes, and it just catches you off guard. And so when we have these discussions, we just got to make sure that, when we really challenge people's thinking, we also create a safe space for them to land, so they're not feeling isolated in this conversation or challenged in this conversation, but they've got like a soft place to land as they're realizing these things for the first time. And so I think that's kind of the fringe work that's happening around equity is like, there's a lot of folks that have to do reconciliation and reparations that we're just as a culture not very good about. We just want to move on, and it's like, no, come back. We're not quite done with that subject yet. Like, how do we figure that out? I think is the key from my point of view. Like once we can figure out a way of bringing people together and talking about it and feel safe, then I think the next step is, great, now I've got all these ideas. I have this weight lifted off my shoulder, and now I can, become more creative in our efforts. So, I think Glide has a great opportunity to create those spaces, to guide people to those spaces, and then let them be their best selves with coming up with the solutions and the innovations to, to make sure that equity is not something I have to talk about every day. That would be great. So yeah, that's for me probably the biggest thing.
Thank you.
I'd say.
Well, there definitely have been lots of comments in the chat and heart emojis and all kinds of things. I'd like to thank you again for giving your time so generously and for informing us on the state of Glide programs. And I think everybody is energized and excited about the possibilities. If I could please, can I turn this back over to Minister Marvin K. White to take us out? And that could be however you want to do it, sir, because you are creative.
All right, let's all point our hands in the direction of Ken Kim. I'm kidding.
We'll do it.
I am really super excited about where we are as a church on the eve of our emancipation and our reformation. That we are poised for a renaissance, and we're poised to return to the energy that birthed the programs that we are talking about now. The pot that scaled, and I'm skipping decades, into a meals program, the difference that scaled into harm. This is circle of women, that is the women. Like this is like the church is fertile ground to produce the next thing that might become a program. So I'm to, to accept Ken's invitation, to dream, to try, to iterate, fail, to come back and try again, knowing that always at the center of what we do are the people that we love and serve in our community, in our clients, and in our church. So it is worth us to figure out what it is we want to this community. So good work. We're super inspired, and everybody keep dreaming it.
Thank you, Marvin. I will be sending loading this up into the chat if you want to revisit it. and not in the chat, I'm sorry, onto the YouTube page. If you are not a part of the GLIDE Racial Justice Group, please join us on Facebook. There is a page that has more information, and then there is a group that has more the internal and events. So we invite you to do either. And feel free to reach out to me if you have new ideas that have come up that you want to add to our docket. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you,
Bye,
Paula.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marvin. Oh, sorry.